One. This is Dr. Jack Nordhaus of Insurance Marketing and Management Services and the Inside Track Service. And our topic today will be agency acquisitions and mergers, and we'll be talking with Al Diamond of Agency Consulting Group, who really knows whereof he speaks. Morning, Al.
Good morning, Jack. How are you?
I'm just fine, and let's just get into it. Okay, I've been around for a while, that's for sure, and I learned something from every one of these, and just about as long as you have.
I've been around for a while, too.
A lot of years. Okay, well, let's talk about acquisitions and mergers and what's involved and all that good stuff.
Okay, well, when we're talking about acquisitions, obviously, agencies all over the country are acquiring other agencies at record paces. Some of them because of financial need for acquisition, and others for mergers, for perpetuation, for growth. All of these have continued unabated over the last 20 years, and they're still growing. We're not losing agents, we're not losing staff, we're just losing individual units as they combine into larger units for economies of scale. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about acquiring agencies, there are a number of topics that we have to talk about. For instance, we've got to talk about how we find them. And Jack, I'm sorry, but I'm clicking and clicking over and over again, and nothing is happening.
Oh, damn.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, let's just go ahead. How do you find them?
The question is, how do you find them? That's the first question. The second question that always comes up is, how do you value the agencies that you find? The third question is, how do you know that what you're being told is accurate when you're talking to someone else who's either a friend or you've never met them before? Mm-hmm. Is this something that's a take-it-or-leave-it scenario, or can you negotiate an acquisition? Mm-hmm. And then how much risk are you willing to take? Because the risk is sometimes in paying more than the value of an agency to acquire it for other purposes.
Okay.
So we're going to cover all of these in the next few minutes, and of course, through your facility at the Inside Track, at IMMS and SAMIS, you have a lot of facilities to help those agents that deal with you, and so do we. So we invite them to call us at any time, and we'll talk their way through it or help them in any way we can.
Absolutely.
So the first question, obviously, is how do you find these agencies? We keep talking about agency acquisitions. There are a lot of agents out there that says, if I had the opportunity to acquire them, I would, but I never get the opportunity. By the time I find out someone's for sale, they're already gone. Mm-hmm. So the first way is, when you're looking for agencies, is looking at agents you already know. This requires an insurance agent to be a little bit more than he has been during his entire career. Most of our agency clients have been insurance sales and service people. They know insurance products. They deal with clients very well. They only deal with other agents in a social atmosphere, through associations, in a casual way. The agents that you've met casually over the years are actually potential targets. You have to evaluate them. You have to figure out whether they're the kind of agent that you would like to associate with through acquisition, merger, or whatever. So agents that you already know is a good first step. The second one, and we play this down, although these are a very valuable source, are your insurance company representatives. They talk to you on a fairly regular basis as their agents. They also talk to all of their other agents. They hear when an agent becomes closer or ready to move and do something different. If those insurance companies see you as a growth-oriented agency as opposed to a stagnant agency or a declining agency, if you actually tell them that you are interested in acquiring other agencies and merging together to continue to strengthen them as well as yourself, they will refer agents to each other. And so we don't want to discount those. Mm-hmm. location for finding agencies is at association meetings. These are not the kind of meetings where you're sitting up front and taking notes and participating, but it's the kind of meetings that you go to where you have social time with other agents and you're talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
There are a series of questions to ask agents that will lead you to find out whether those agents are available at some point in time, whether they're getting closer to a perpetuation issue. We never actually want to say, I'm looking for agents to buy, because agents will steer away from you as if you were a dentist or a funeral director. What you want to do is be friends with those agents and tell them how well you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
When you target agents that you would potentially like to acquire, you have to look at those agents as if they were your insurance prospects. You don't sit and wait in your office for the telephone to ring and someone to say, hey, I need insurance, come help me. You actually reach out. You get referrals from your existing clients. You go out and you do marketing, and you try to meet as many prospects that are in your field of vision for insurance as you can. Well, why not do exactly the same things with insurance agents? We'll show you in a couple of minutes a program that we've developed that does exactly that and assures you acquisitions over a period of time. It's called the Dirty Dozen.
Mm-hmm.
The way this works is you identify anywhere. We call it a Dirty Dozen because if you're doing this with 12 agencies, our history says you can drop an agency every year or two into your pocket as an acquisition. You may do it with 2 or 3 agents. You may do it with 5 or 10. You may do it with more than 12. But if you do it with 12, over the long period of time, you will eventually acquire an agency a year or an agency every 2 years. And the way you do the Dirty Dozen is the same way we recommend marketing to prospects for insurance, and that's a continuous contact model where you are going to visit those agents perhaps once a quarter, always nothing but socially.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing with those agents during that social visit is telling them that whether times are good or times are tough, you're living through it and you're doing well as an agency. And if there's anything you can do to help them, they're a friend of yours. You will do whatever you can. If you are the friend of those agents, when the time comes for them to consider retirement, to consider perpetuation, to consider financial needs that require conglomeration of agencies, they will think of you first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that works.
You're top of mind.
I'm sorry?
You're top of mind with them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so market to them the same way you'd market to your clients.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those are in a nutshell where to find agents. You don't find them through the newspapers. You don't find them through fire sales when agents are being attacked by the insurance department. You're buying nothing but trouble then. You find them because they like you, you know them, you've been introduced to them by referrals, and you work with them over a prolonged period of time. But once you find them, what do you do with them? How do you value them? Do you take that agent's word for it? My agency's worth $1 million. Pay me $1 million and you can have it. Well, the answer is no. There are certain things that you need to look at. Whether it's you or us or other financial advisors, there is a process to go through to value agencies. First thing you have to do is look at 5 years' worth of historical operating statements. These are the documents that we recommend that everyone get from potential target agencies in order to properly create a value. So this isn't when you first introduce to them. This isn't when you're socially talking to them. This is when they have come to you or you have come to them and they've said, it might be a good idea for you and I to do business. You say, great. Let's set a value for your agency. You'll sign, obviously, a confidentiality agreement. And then you say, look, here are the things that we need in order to properly determine the value of your agency. 5 years of the operating statements is first. That should be supported by tax returns. You want to make sure that the tax returns say the same thing that the operating statements do. We often disregard and don't pay enough attention to agency balance sheets. We can show any agent how the balance sheet, not the operating statement, is the most important judge of financial well-being of any business. You do this quite often for your clients if you're dealing with bonds or liability insurance or other forms of insurance that requires financial statements. But we don't think about it when we deal with other agencies. You do need balance sheets. Obviously, we need to look at their year-end production and loss reports from their carriers to find out whether they are as profitable, more profitable, or less profitable than our current agency is. You also want an employee list and compensation history. It doesn't help you very much if you're buying an agency and you find that all of their employees are paid double what your employees are paid.
Ouch. Yeah.
You would also like a list of their top clients. Now, many of them are very reluctant to give this to you, and verifiably so. You may still be a competitor. They don't have to actually give you names. All they need to do is give you an industry or say client number 1, client number 2, because what you're learning from a top client list is whether they are top-heavy, equally distributed, or whether they write multiple small accounts and very little of their business is subject to a crisis in 1 or 2 of their clients. We have had clients of Agency Consulting Group that have had 40% of their revenues coming from one customer.
Ouch. Ooh.
In some ways, that is wonderful. The client of ours who did that was in the rubber business, and the client of his allowed him to set up a separate division and run 5 or 10 people just for that client, and it worked out very nicely as long as that client stayed afloat. But obviously, when you're buying an agency, that's a horrible risk to take, and if you buy the agency, you have to cut a separate deal for those top clients. And finally, we need to create pro forma earnings for the future from trends weighted by a risk discount factor that will help you with, or you can do on your own, to determine how much that client is valued once you see all of the information that we've just covered. So there's a lot to valuing a client besides sitting down in a coffee shop and saying, how much do you want for your agency? And once he gives you this information and tells you everything that you need to know about the agency, are you sure that this information is right? Is it kosher? Whether it's a friend of yours who's trying to impress you with how well his agency has run over the last 20 or 30 years, or someone you first met, you've still got to do your own due diligence. You have to roll up your sleeves. The due diligence is the most important part of the process because you could identify the right price for the right agency, and because there are inherent problems in the agency's operations, it could bury you. Not only take the time that you expected to take in the acquisition of the agency, but take your time away from your regular customers, your employees' time. It's a scary process. If you want to do it yourself, we can show you how. We can give you all the ingredients of due diligence. Or you could hire a pro to do it. And we'll come in and we'll roll up our sleeves. We'll do that due diligence for you. We have no axe to grind in the game. Whether the information is right or wrong, we'll tell you what it is. Or you do it yourself. Don't go public with any information. Don't tell your employees, don't tell your companies, don't tell your clients, nothing without signing a letter of intent. And this is on either side of the game. Once you've reached the point of a letter of intent, you've actually agreed that under the circumstances, if everything proves to be true in your due diligence, you are buying that agency. They are buying you. You're merging, whatever that situation is. So never go public without that letter of intent. The LOI is your license to do the due diligence. The letter of intent gives the rudiments, and we'll talk about this at greater length in a few minutes, but it gives you the rudiments of the deal but it doesn't mean that it can't be changed. Because if you find information that doesn't match the facts that have been given, you have a chance to change the deal, make it right, or you still have a chance to walk away. And this is on either side of the game. So this is how you tell whether a deal is really right, if it's kosher. Here's what we do in the letters of intent. A letter of intent from our perspective is a letter in plain English defining the agreed upon price and terms, and it's always subject to due diligence. So by the time you've gotten here, you said, look, I want $1 million from my agency, and you say, look, if the agency's worth $1 million, I will certainly buy it from you for $1 million. Let's go through the due diligence and see. It usually requires an honesty money deposit. That can be anything from a nominal amount, a few $1,000s, to 5 or 10% of the purchase price or more. However, that money is refundable. It's not non-refundable money. Okay. And it basically tells the seller that you are truly looking to buy the agency. You're willing to put cash up. The letter of intent is what you use with your attorneys to create the agreement. That agreement should be created while you're in the process of due diligence, so that once the due diligence is over, you've proven that the numbers that you've come up with, the terms you've come up with are correct, the agreement is ready to be signed and the contract is ready to go. So that's how we do letters of intent. It doesn't have to be very complex. The letter of intent does not have to be contract driven. It drives the contract rather than the reverse. Mm-hmm. When we talk about due diligence, we've mentioned it a number of times. Here is what you have to do specifically within due diligence. First thing, clarify for yourself every line of his operating statement that seems different than yours. If it's unusual or you don't understand it, you've got to understand what it means. Is there slush money? Is there money going into personal expenses that he won't have or that you won't have once you buy the agency? That needs to be clarified. If you're doing a stock purchase, do the same thing with the balance sheet because you're buying his balance sheet. That means you're buying his assets on a dollar-for-dollar basis usually, and you're buying his liabilities. So you don't want to be stuck with obligations that he has if the balance sheet doesn't jive with the numbers that you're paying for the agency. The balance sheet can, in fact, grow the agency's value because it is dollar for dollar, cash in the bank, tangible net worth, or could shrink the value of the agency because many, many agencies have balance sheets that are upside down. It doesn't mean they're a bad agency. It means that they've taken out more money than they should have. Interview the employees during the due diligence phase. You've already signed a letter of intent. The employees know that something is happening. Everyone is looking to do this in hopefully a very honest, upfront manner. You want to know that the employees will stay with you. We have just completed an analysis after a sale. We weren't included in the actual negotiations before because after the sale, within a year of the sale, 7 of 9 employees left, putting our client in great risk. So we had to come in and help him out. In that way, you don't want that to happen unless you're purposely looking to lose employees, which is possible as well. You want to visit the carriers. You want to gain assurance that their contracts will transfer over if they're different than yours, that your contracts will include his book of business if you have similar companies, or that your companies have the appetite to take rollovers if you don't intend to keep his carriers, moving business to your carriers for the obvious benefits of having larger volumes with the carriers. You want to review the top clients with the agent to identify any clients at risk. Clients who have been shopping for the last couple of years, clients who are so tied to that particular agent that once he sells his agency and leaves, they are no longer interested in staying. You need to know who those clients are. You also, obviously, in your due diligence, have to ask about E&O claims. I don't care whether they're pending or paid. We want to know how many there have been in the last 5 years or so, what the circumstances are, and whether they're an indication of poor processing habits, poor administrative habits by the agency, or there were things that couldn't be helped that had nothing to do with the agency's expertise or knowledge base. So that's how we look at our due diligence process. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but we'll cover that with any agent who is interested in learning more about it, whether we help them directly or they do it themselves.
Okay.
The next part in any deal is negotiating a deal through. Well, there are two parts of every deal, so my daddy told me, the price and the terms. You can have either one as long as I get last bat. Because what you're buying most agencies with is future money. So what you want to know is you want to know that the price you're paying is fair to both sides, that if you're paying a higher price, that you're paying it over a longer period of time because it has to meet the cash flow needs that you have determined through your due diligence. When you did those projections that we talked about, and you might want to tune in to our valuation webinar as well, because that really goes into detail on this.
Right.
You'll find how much you can afford to pay on an annual basis or on a total basis over a period of time. If he is demanding more money, it doesn't mean it's a bad deal. It just means you have to pay it over a longer period of time because future money is worth less today than today's money. You can't have the buyer or the seller demanding both sides of the deal to say, here's how much I want, and I want it all in cash. Because if you have that, you basically have to go to a bank or a financer, which is possible, but they will be less flexible than a seller will be in terms, in conditions, in interest rates, and so on. So there are two parts of every deal. Negotiate those. Bad deals satisfy only the need of the buyer or only the need of the seller. Any deal, even if you're on the upside, where only you are satisfied with the result and the other side feels cheated, whether it's the buyer or seller, that's a bad deal.
Yeah, that's
and eventually it will come back to haunt you.
That's the old zero-sum game.
Exactly.
Should be the win-win.
You always aim for a win-win. If you satisfy both the buyer and the seller, then you have the best deal possible, and you'll have a satisfactory deal all the way through the process. And don't be penny wise and pound foolish. If you're separated from a deal by a few $1,000s, don't stand so much on your principles that you lose a deal of a lifetime that could make you millions of dollars over the rest of your career. So go ahead and negotiate in good faith, but don't back yourself into a corner, and don't back the other person into a corner. Now, here is a key to negotiating. It's wise to use someone else, whether it's us, an accountant, an attorney, someone who has a fallback position by coming back to you. When you have the end seller and the end buyer talking to each other across a table, if they reach an impasse, that's a wall that can't be scaled. One of them actually has to give up and be viewed as being weaker in order to move the deal forward. If you have intermediaries speaking for you, they have instructions from you. They are discussing all details with you, so they're not making decisions for you without your knowledge. But if they find a turn of events that requires them to be more flexible, they can, at the very least, say, I need to talk to the owner, and I'll get back to you, and it gives you time to discuss the scenario and see what your fallback or your secondary position is. So that's the point of negotiations.
Okay.
One of my favorite poets and songwriters, Kenny Rogers, penned a phrase, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. This isn't true just in cards. This is true in deals.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a great agency that is available to you. All you need to do is overpay for it. Or all you need to do is pay faster than you can afford it and take money out of your own agency or bank account every single year to try and pay for it, and suddenly the greatest agency deal falls apart. You need to know what your limits are for any agency, and it is different for each one, and don't go beyond those limits. It's the same philosophy as gambling. You know how much you want to win, walk away when you win, and you win all the time. You know how much you can afford to lose, walk away when you lose, and you will minimize your losses. Acquisitions isn't the only function that we do, and there are similar activities in mergers as there are in acquisitions. So if we can, Jack, if you can give me a few more minutes, I'd like to talk about mergers
Absolutely.
as well.
You bet.
In a merger, you have a number of considerations. The first question that we're always asked is, am I too small? Am I too small? Am I not worth selling? Am I too young to retire? There are a number of things that influence an agency to merge instead of to sell. Perhaps the agency is only a few $100,000, and the agency owner is in his 40s or 50s. He's not going to get enough out of his agency to support him for the rest of his life. He still has to do something to earn a living for the rest of his life. He's not old enough to retire unless he's independently wealthy. Sale of agency may not be the appropriate response. So instead, you ask the question, can you share? You can grow larger by sharing in things like a larger profit stream, by sharing responsibilities with one or more other agents, and by sharing some decision making. There are some of us, and I know, Jack, you and I have never met them, but I hear that there are some people who have high enough ego drives that makes this a little difficult.
Oh, yes. Believe it or
But
not.
there are also many agents who are not that way and who are interested in supporting their lifestyle, supporting their families, supporting their employees and their clients. And if they see the pressures of the insurance agency system, the insurance companies, the economy, mergers might be a great answer for them as well. Remember, it's a business. This isn't your personal piggy bank. This isn't something that you strip of all the dollars every single year. You take every single dollar out of it. If you're doing that, you are an insurance agent and probably and could be a very successful one. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you are not an insurance agency and shouldn't merge with someone else because you won't be able to take every single dollar out of the agency. You won't be able to make every single decision. And if the agency is not a piggy bank, if you have an agency, it's also not a money pit. We have seen an awful lot of agents who have worked their way out of a potential acquisition of their agency, a sale of their agency, because they have put hundreds of thousands of their personal dollars into the agency trying to save it. It's no longer available to merge with another agency because no other agency wants to participate in your debt, especially if they don't have debt. So in a situation like that, merger may not be the right answer. But if merger is the right answer, one of the questions you ask is whether you're merging or you're buying an agency, is there any circumstance under which you would pay more than an agency is worth to acquire that agency or to merge with that agency, putting in more than the other side would put in? Well, the answer is, yeah, there are a few reasons. Small-town America often has 1, 2, 3, or 4 agencies that pretty much share the entire book of business of the geographic area. Eliminating the competition gives you a bigger market share automatically. that might be worth paying more for an agency than would normally be justified. Needed talent. We know in many areas talent is the most screaming need of the insurance agency business. We can find customers, we can find companies, but we can't find people to either sell or service the product. If your competitor has that talent and is willing to merge with you or to sell to you, buying that needed talent may be worth a few more dollars than what you have valued the agency at. A third one that we see very commonly, I save it for third because too many agents use this, is buying companies. You have carriers that at the moment are the best carriers in your marketplace, and they won't plant with you because they already have agencies in the geographic area. So you're going to spend an extra $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million in an acquisition of an agency or a merger with another agency to get that company. Guess what?
Yep.
6 months later, that company has changed its underwriting habits, and it's no longer the company that you expected when you bought into it. So you're taking quite a gamble.
And you are stuck with it, yeah.
And you're stuck with that company.
Yeah.
You can, sell your way out of that company too. You can move the business, but if you overpay for an agency because of the company, that's a poor reason because companies are transitory. Companies used to be pretty stable for a long period of time. That isn't the case anymore. So when do mergers make sense? First thing we ask is for economies of scale. That is the first thing that we look at in any merger, where two entities working together can generate more growth than the two of them individually would do, or would generate less expense than the two of them individually would do. Those economies of scale put more revenue, or better yet, more profit into the pockets of the owners of the agency immediately. And that's probably one of the best reasons for merging agencies. A second reason, we know how much the insurance companies have been pressuring agencies over the past decade or two to grow profitably with them. Well, it's hard to do one policy at a time, especially when you're in a smaller town and all of the geography is covered by a number of agents. Well, if you merge, suddenly that insurance company sees you as being a larger player with them. We'll give you more contingency, may give you a higher commission contract, will give you more benefits than you would have had otherwise. A Section 1031 tax-free exchange. 1031 or 1035, either one of those, results in taking two agencies, putting them together for a non-taxable event, so you can take advantage of that volume with the carriers or economies of scale, and it doesn't cost you a single dollar more in taxation.
It's a great idea.
So there's another reason. Mm-hmm. Another reason is more philosophical than it is actual, but it really makes sense. Cooperation instead of competition. One of our earliest mergers were two agencies in the Southwest who had been fighting each other for the same community of clients for generations, not years. Ouch. We were on the third or fourth generation of ownership in the families in each of those agencies. Well, while Dad and Grandpa and Great-Grandpa hated each other and fought viciously against each other for the clients, the children, the last generation, were friends. They grew up together, they went to school together, went to classes together, took their licensing, and so on. Once all of the older generation moved on, these guys said, why are we fighting every single year for the same clients, trading clients? They merged, they were in a cooperative situation, and they were able to grow out of their geographic area because they were no longer worried about competition within it. So those are some really good reasons for mergers. How do mergers get valued? Well, value both agencies in the same way. Obviously, we would prefer that you use technical, competent valuation methods. And as I said, we're doing another webinar for you on agency valuation, and we recommend that every agent looking and listening to this also look in on that valuation webinar as well. But whether you use a good, solid technical way of valuing agencies, or whether you use a thumb scale multiple of something, at least do it the same way for both agencies. The shares of the merged agencies should equal the total agency value of both or all of the agencies involved. Mm-hmm. So we're not giving anyone an extraneous benefit where one agency gets twice the value of shares as the other agency. That's called an acquisition. It may look like a merger, but it's not when one agency comes out ahead of the game and basically runs the other. Mm-hmm. We do due diligence in mergers, just like we do due diligence in an acquisition, except we compare data and analyze them together to see where the economies can strengthen the organization. Now, this is what we do in a merger as a consulting firm. However, you're certainly invited to do it yourself as the owners of two or more agencies that intend to merge together. Bring your data together, put them side by side, analyze them, and see where they differ, where they're similar, and then construct a third pro forma that says if we were together, here's how our revenue would look, here's how our expenses would look, footnoting those expenses that can be cut or used together to get economies of scale. Do you really need two accountants, two attorneys, two receptionists if you move together? Next thing you do is you create a well-defined organization chart before you do the deal. There is nothing worse than thinking you have a merger put together and then the owners of the agency can't decide which receptionist to use. And you end up paying two receptionists because they both love their receptionists.
Of course.
Make those decisions, create that organization, determine those points of similarity or difference before you do the deal. Once you have those first two things done, the data analysis and pro forma and the organization chart, only then do each of you go to your strongest carriers. You go together, but the spokesman for the group is the stronger of the agents with each carrier, and tell them about the desired merger and confirm that they will participate with the merger. We do know in some cases there are some animosity between companies and certain insurance agents. Mm-hmm. And that animosity is a personal one sometimes, but it carries over and might ruin a merger. So better not to do it at all than to find out that Company A won't do business with Al Diamond for a variety of reasons, no matter what, and will terminate your contract if you're together. Don't assume anything. The unfortunate part of assumptions is that the only person who gets rich from agents assuming something in a merger are the lawyers. Assumptions become lawsuit fodder. So when you do an organization chart, as an example up above, what you're doing is you're writing job descriptions. And we'll talk about that right now. Okay. And when you write job descriptions, you're writing it for every owner so that every owner has distinct responsibilities. We would hate to see two owners coming together where one of them does everything and the other one is sort of semi-retired collecting a paycheck. That eventually becomes a lawsuit. So those job descriptions define what each owner is willing to take as responsibilities so there's no overlap. You don't want the owners to be doing exactly the same thing or making the same decisions. And you're creating an organization chart agreed upon by all owners. Sign your names to it. Date it. What that does is it cements the relationship and says, we agree that this is the way it's going to be. Do things change? Sure they do. But you finally end up with something that the two of you are shaking hands over. The financial part of a merger is secondary to the ego part of a merger. So that's what we have for acquisitions and merger due diligence.
Wow.
Certainly, this is a complex issue. However, it's very rewarding and can double or triple or quadruple the size of your agency overnight. With that size increase comes complexity, so you want to make sure all your homework is done ahead of time. None of this should be done after the merger. It should all be done before the merger. And certainly I'm available, as Jack, I'm sure you are, to assist in whatever way you can with any questions.
Definitely. Well, Al, I want to thank you. I know this is 40 minutes of just solid gold, and I certainly want to thank you for sharing. As we've mentioned, we're going to do a separate webinar on agency valuation, which is a complex topic in its own right, but I do want to thank you very much for your time, and we love you, man.
It's my pleasure.